In the heart of fog-laden London, where gas lamps flickered like ghostly sentinels and shadows danced with sinister intent, Jill lived a life of duality. By day, she was a brilliant medical student, her mind a labyrinth of anatomical knowledge and surgical precision. Her professors marveled at her skill, her classmates envied her intellect, but none suspected the darkness that lurked beneath her composed exterior. By night, she transformed into the feared Jack the Ripper, a name that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened Londoners. Jill's transformation was not born of malice, but of compulsion. Her childhood was marked by tragedy, a series of misfortunes that twisted her psyche into a grotesque reflection of her once innocent self. Her father, a surgeon of great renown, had been a tyrant at home, demanding perfection and punishing failure with a cold clinical detachment. Jill's mother, a meek woman, had succumbed to despair, leaving Jill alone to navigate her father's wrath. It was in this crucible of cruelty that Jill's obsession with surgical perfection was forged. As the Ripper, Jill moved through the streets with the grace of a predator, her mind a symphony of calculated precision and chaotic impulse. She chose her victims with care, women who reminded her of her own mother, women who she believed needed saving from a life of misery. Her knife was an extension of her will, carving through flesh with a deftness that belied her small stature. Each murder was a masterpiece of mutilation, a testament to her skill and her madness. The city was gripped by fear, the newspapers filled with lurid accounts of the Ripper's latest atrocity. The police were baffled, their efforts to catch the killer thwarted by Jill's meticulous planning and intimate knowledge of anatomy. She reveled in the chaos she created, each murder a release of the pent-up rage and despair that had festered within her for so long. Yet, as the body count rose, so too did the toll on Jill's fragile psyche. Her dual life began to unravel, the line between Jill the student and Jack the killer blurring into a haze of blood and regret. She found herself haunted by the faces of her victims, their eyes accusing her in the dark recesses of her mind. The meticulous control she had once wielded with ease now slipped through her fingers like sand, and with each passing day, the risk of exposure grew. The police, desperate for a lead, turned to Inspector Abberline, a man known for his keen intellect and unorthodox methods. Abberline, unlike his colleagues, harbored a radical theory. What if the Ripper was not a man, but a woman? His suspicions were fueled by the testimony of a witness who claimed to have seen Mary Kelly, one of the Ripper's victims, alive hours after her supposed death. Abberline pondered the possibility that the killer had disguised themselves in their victims' clothes, a theory that pointed to a female perpetrator. As Abberline closed in, Jill's inner demons waged a war for her soul. She was consumed by a maelstrom of guilt and fear, her once steady hands now trembling with the weight of her deeds. She knew the end was near, that her reign of terror could not continue. Yet the compulsion to kill, to perfect her art, was a siren's call she could not resist. In a desperate bid to maintain her facade, Jill concocted a plan to throw the police off her trail. She staged a murder that deviated from her usual pattern, hoping to sow confusion and buy herself more time. But in her haste, she made a fatal error, leaving behind a clue that pointed directly to her. Abberline seized upon Jill's mistake with the tenacity of a hound on a scent, his suspicions now confirmed. The error was small, almost insignificant to the untrained eye, but to Abberline, it was the crack in the facade he had been waiting for. Jill, in her haste and growing paranoia, had left behind a bloodied handkerchief embroidered with her initials, a keepsake she always carried but had foolishly forgotten in her frenzy. The realization of her blunder struck Jill like a physical blow, her mind spiraling into a vortex of fear and self-recrimination. She could feel the walls closing in, the noose tightening around her neck as the specter of capture loomed ever closer. Jill's paranoia became her constant companion, a shadow that whispered insidious doubts and fears into her ear. She saw betrayal in every glance, heard accusation in every whisper. Her once steady hands trembled as she performed her daily tasks, the fear of discovery gnawing at her composure. She imagined the police closing in, their footsteps echoing ominously in her mind, and the thought of the gallows sent shivers down her spine. Yet, beneath the fear lurked a twisted sense of exhilaration, a thrill that came from dancing so close to the edge of oblivion. Abberline orchestrated a trap with meticulous care, setting the stage for a confrontation that would seal Jill's fate. He chose a dimly lit alley, a place where the fog hung thick and heavy, muffling sound and obscuring vision. It was a setting that mirrored the murky depths of Jill's mind, a labyrinth of fear and madness. As she stood cornered, the fog swirling around her like a shroud, Jill faced her reckoning. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the chaos in her mind. She felt exposed, vulnerable, the layers of her deception stripped away to reveal the raw, bleeding truth beneath. The detective's eyes bore into hers, a mixture of pity and determination etched into his features. Abberline, a man hardened by years of chasing shadows and lies, saw in Jill not a monster, but a tragic figure caught in the web of her own making. He understood the darkness that drove her, the demons that whispered in her ear, for he had seen them before in others who had fallen from grace. Yet, duty bound him to his course, and he stepped forward, handcuffs at the ready, his resolve unshaken. "Why, Jill?" Abberline asked, his voice a soft echo in the night. "Why do this?" His words hung in the air, a question that demanded an answer, a plea for understanding in a world gone mad. Jill's mind raced, her thoughts a cacophony of remorse and defiance. She saw the faces of her victims, heard their cries, felt their blood on her hands. Each face was a mirror reflecting her own torment, each cry a testament to the horror she had wrought. In that moment of clarity, she realized that her quest for perfection had led her down a path of no return, that she had become the very monster she had sought to escape. Her life, once filled with promise and potential, had become a grotesque parody of what it might have been. "I wanted to save them," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant clamor of the city. "I wanted to save myself." Her words were a confession, an admission of guilt and a plea for absolution. She had killed to silence the demons within, to find peace in the chaos of her mind, but in doing so she had only fed the darkness that consumed her. Abberline's expression softened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He saw not a monster, but a broken soul, a woman trapped in a prison of her own making. He recognized the desperation in her eyes, the longing for redemption that lay beneath the veneer of madness. Yet, he knew that redemption was a luxury she could no longer afford, that the price of her sins was one she must pay in full. As he reached for her, Jill's mind was a tempest, her heart a battleground of conflicting desires. She could surrender, face the consequences of her actions, or she could fight, end her life on her own terms. The choice was hers alone, a final act of defiance against a world that had betrayed her. In a moment of clarity, Jill made her decision. She drew her knife, the blade gleaming in the moonlight, a symbol of her defiance and her despair. But instead of turning it on Abberline, she pressed it to her own throat, a grim smile playing on her lips. "Let this be my final masterpiece," she said, her voice steady, her resolve unshaken. With a swift, decisive motion, Jill ended her life, the knife slicing through flesh with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She fell to the ground, her blood pooling around her, a crimson testament to her tragic end. The fog closed in, enveloping her in its cold embrace, a shroud for the fallen angel who had dared to defy the darkness. Abberline watched in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had witnessed. He knelt beside her, closing her eyes with a gentle hand, a silent prayer for the soul that had been lost to madness. He knew that the city would awaken to the news of the Ripper's demise, that the streets would buzz with speculation and relief. Yet, as the fog lifted and the sun cast its pale light over London, a sense of unease lingered. The true identity of Jack the Ripper remained a mystery, the truth buried with Jill in an unmarked grave. As Abberline turned away, the fog rolled in once more, shrouding the city in its ethereal embrace. And in the silence, the whispers of the past echoed on, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows of the human soul.